Bing. All right, on our adult badges site, we've done some really great work in our evidence area. So the evidence for badges, we did our visual Venn from last time around, and are continuing to iterate on that. And I've rewatched some of the video where we talked about how we can start prototyping this with educators and things like that. But I promised that we would actually look at value proposition as the core of what we do today. So for those of you who are not at our lovely late night rendezvous with 100, 200 teachers and the school board last night, you might not have ever seen this 3-ring circle or Venn diagram, but I'd love to talk it through and just talk about what those 3 things are that we talked about last night. You might be tired of it by now, but but it's important to kind of know what we are thinking in terms of the value proposition, not just for the individual, the earner, which is in that personalized circle, really thinking about who you are as a learner and what your personalized value proposition might be. Over here in the localized area, that is going to be our school-based value proposition. So for the school that you are within as a learner, is there value for the school? And then the centralized being obviously our central office friends, including ourselves. That value proposition is something that we could call out rather than just looking at it in these sort of more generalized terms, which is what we did initially. So our work today is actually, and I wanted to make sure that we were listening to the things that were happening last night from teachers. There were some really amazing folks who spoke, both teachers and leaders from that personalized and localized level, who said, told some great stories about what professional learning can be and the effect that it can have and the value that they saw. And rather than us staying at a very high theoretical level, I actually wanted us to look at some micro-credentials that already exist and think about what the value to central office, what the value to a school, what the value to an individual for those micro-credentials might be. And so what I have here is on the right-hand side, and Amanda, you can just follow along with what you are looking at on your own screen, or hopefully the screen is matching up to what you're seeing as well. But essentially, you can look at where it says use these micro-credentials.
Ben, I've been watching on your page. How do I get to that page when I'm on the site?
So if you're on the site, so bit.ly/BPL site, and you just scroll down to where it says a value proposition. Do you see that a little bit?
On the homepage?
No, under, so it's under competencies and adult badges is where our adult badging work is happening. Do you see that maybe?
Yeah, give me 1 second.
No worries.
Alrighty.
All right. So if you scroll down to where it says value proposition, what we're going to be looking at are the digital promise micro-credentials, which now there are a lot.
Yeah, they've added
So they have added a bunch. Last week, they added some for new teachers, which may be valuable to look at from that perspective. But they have what they call stacks of micro-credentials for adult learners. And so what's great about this is that they already exist, right? You can apply for these micro-credentials. And so I wanted to start from a place of very concrete and saying, actually, these are micro-credentials that already exist. What value would our district have by embracing something like this, an anti-bias instruction micro-credential? What value would an individual school have, the value proposition, or an individual teacher, if they receive this micro-credential as it is written? What value would they see? Because this is very, like, this is something that is real. It's not a theoretical micro-credential. It is one that already exists. Whether we chose to actually adopt the micro-credential as is sort of not the scope here for this conversation, but really looking at actual micro-credentials as they exist and talking about what the value proposition to those three things are. I'm going to give you a
just
process.
For like framing our own thinking of like where this potentially goes. That is something that is on the table to think about. Maybe in some instances we can adopt something instead of reinventing it.
Correct. Yeah. And so for the folks who would be sitting over here from social emotional, or who would be sitting over here from science and math, like those micro-credentials might not be represented here, but some of the work that we are already doing is represented here. And we might be able to, essentially we become the endorsers at that point, right? Like we are endorsing micro-credentials that already exist. And so from that, what we would like to do is think about those three areas, the centralized, localized, and personalized, and to actually talk about what is the value for those concrete micro-credentials, because it gives us a sort of a starting point. And so this little Venn diagram you can actually open up as a, you can open up as a Google drawing, and we can actually edit it. My recommendation is that we actually do some screen grabs from the site so that we have some context there and it's not just text on the Venn. And I did provide, if you are so inclined, the Nimbus screenshot tool, if you are not familiar with that one, to actually do some screen grabs of the Bloomboard site, which houses all of the Digital Promise micro-credentials. But I would love for us to spend some time this morning taking a look at individual micro-credentials and saying, well, what is the value here? And putting those into the three-part Venn diagram. So that is the activity that we are going to be engaged in today, actually making some meaning from these. So I would encourage you to go deep with one or two rather than just looking out across all of them, so that you have some context there, and that we actually do that part of it. So I'd encourage you to do one, and then actually, because we're such a lovely small group today, that we can actually go fairly deeply on a couple of these and talk about that value proposition. So what questions do you have about sort of going through that process and making some meaning for what the value proposition is in those three key areas: centralized of the central office, localized of school, and then personalized for the individual who is earning that micro-credential?
As far as us diving deep, you envision sort of like in the previous exercises, so we'll take a screenshot of this, then we'll go ahead and expand it, dive in, and kind of do that more processing as a comment on the drawing.
So yeah, if you want to do an example. So I'm going to look at effective leadership. So that is a micro-credential right here. And so if I have the screenshot tool, Nimbus, I can have it where it takes, let's say, a selected area. I'm going to select this right here and just grab maybe that right there. So I can edit it, or I can download it. I can write on it directly on the screenshot if I want to do that, or I can just very, very easily, save the screenshot and pop it into, there we go. Oh, let's see what's going on. And so then I can actually upload that and insert the image so that we can do the same thing that we kind of did with the last one, where we're making copies or we're making comments, excuse me, on top of that. So you can resize, put it anywhere that you might like, cropping it further and things like that. So effective leadership, I feel like that would be a huge value proposition, maybe most for centralized. And so if I make a comment directly on that, then I can start talking about that. But I would encourage you to play with it and see what it is that you would like to find value in, and call attention to, what you see here. Because more than anything, I would like to look at some micro-credentials. I'd like to look at the things that already exist, rather than just sort of staying in theory land, which is what we sometimes do, not always, but I like getting really concrete with this. Amanda, any questions?
Nope, got it.
Perfect. All right. So let's take about maybe 10 minutes to do maybe one or two, if you have the time and attention to do that. And then we will kind of debrief and bring it back to a larger group. Because we are such a small group, I'm actually going to do this with folks who are absent as well, holding another session before we come back all together as well. But I think there is some really good value in us doing it as a small group.
And do you want us to, in our kind of deep dive, crosswalk to competencies?
If you want to do that, yeah, absolutely. Because you have that context, and I think that bringing that in would be super valuable. All right, 10 minutes are on the clock. Go.
Hello.
Kevin.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
All right, awesome.
All right, we're on the adult badging page, doing the activity that is under the value proposition section.
All right.
Are you in your car, Kevin?
Yeah, I'm driving.
It's going to be more difficult for you.
Oh yeah, I was bringing up the page though.
Oh, no.
Oh, Kevin, you make me so happy sometimes.
I'm multitasking.
Huh? That's exactly what we want you to be, safe while you're doing that.
Well, I just drove by a huge accident. Yeah.
Hey, Kevin, your mic is moving around a bunch. I'm just going to mute you for a second so you can unmute when you need to. Okay, bud?
Oh, yeah, I'll mute it on this then. Sorry.
Okay, cool. Feel free to make it real small because you can sort of zoom in infinitely on the drawing. So in case you were wondering, you can link from an image. So you can actually link to the micro-credential itself if you are so inclined to do so. Okay, 2 more minutes. Mm. All right. We got some good stuff, although it's interesting that we don't have anything that is truly just about the centralized perspective. But I think that's also a function of the micro-credentials themselves, right, that are less focused on a centralized district perspective. So pick one, Noah, that you would like to talk about.
So I just finished.
You're good?
I'm kind of interested in one of the ones that falls just in one circle.
Yep.
And so it looks like the bottom one on personalized links to the second one, so practicing reflection.
Yep. So that one, if you didn't have an opportunity to look at it, is really interesting because it is such a sort of mirrored practice. It is both about student reflection and teacher reflection. And so it is asking for, in the evidence, for evidence of both of those things. So how did students reflect? How did you reflect as a teacher? And I really like that idea of, and that's a little bit of what we talked about with the evidence conversation this last time around.
Mm-hmm.
How is it that each component of each micro-credential that we might endorse might have both of those components? Because then you can be assured that there is some student impact because the students are also talking about their own reflection. But I see that as, or I saw it at least as, you know what, it could have effect on the overall school approach or on the whole district as a whole. But like, to me, it is as front lines as you could possibly get in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if students and teachers are reflecting, that is an amazing thing for that classroom.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons I was drawn to like those two down there on the personalized and the ones on the localized is kind of curious to unpack why people put it. So I'm kind of hearing that you saw it as more so than anything else personalized. And it's sort of inextricable from localized as well. That a teacher
Because it
who's
is
been
within the
credentialed in
context.
doing that, it's going to impact that at the local school community. And I think there's even on this one that you did, Ben, we can sort of expand the definition of localized, to a broader ecosystem of parents, right? If teachers are teaching, if a teacher has been credentialed in reflection, is doing that with students, that might manifest itself in teacher and student-led conferencing, right? And so all of a sudden, we have parent stakeholders who are part of that could be, kind of the beneficiaries of that. More towards centralized. I think we're probably going to find in a lot of these that, there's going to be a default centralized stakeholdership in that, in almost every case, knowing, for example, who has been credentialed in this practice of reflection lets us know things like, oh, we can use that to identify people down the hall for novice teachers to lean on. We can use that information if we ever want to schedule learning walks around the district around certain topics. If we want to create opportunities for career laddering or teacher leadership, that could be a lever, that informs that. And so I just really long, verbose, meandering way of saying that. I think we're going to find in most cases that stuff goes, a lot closer to the one that Bev put in the very middle, that some are going to have more like immediate stuff in one of the three circles, but we're probably going to find that they're all in some ways hitting all three.
Yeah, and I like that idea of expanding localized to include parents, right? Like at the school level, that is a stakeholder group at the school level that is key there, and then personalized actually including students. And that is a stakeholder group there. And almost like if we expand out centralized, right, like the community at large as a stakeholder group that would have a strong component of like, well, that's who we would turn to endorse these things, right? Like we're turning to students to say these micro-credentials are important on the personalized side. We're turning to parents to say, actually, what's going on in the classroom is valuable for my child. Actually, from a centralized perspective, these community components like that is
professional organizations could like come to be viewed on the centralized stuff that, a librarian at Gateway got credentialed in this skill, and for us to know that we have folks in our membership who've been credentialed in this skill.
Totally. Well, let's actually go to something in the middle, but I do want to welcome Sam. Thank you so much for joining as well. We're hanging out over here. It looks like you are elsewhere, but
I'm at Central. I had to track down some kids. I'm in the library.
Yeah, please don't apologize for hanging out with kids. So Bev, you put a couple maybe in the middle there. Is there one that you'd like to take a look at?
I guess, when we were talking about this earlier, we had put students at the center.
Yep.
And many of the ones I glanced at obviously would impact students, but I didn't see students actively they were kind of the recipient of the credential, if you will.
Totally.
Rather than actively involved in the achievement of the micro-credential. I don't know, maybe you could argue this differently. That particular one, though,
using PAs?
Using performance assessments. And it, as I skimmed through the requirements for that, part of it was using performance assessment process, and specifically peer feedback was involved. So I thought students were really actively involved in that, maybe more so than in some of the others. So I thought it exemplified that center circle more
really
so
well
than some others.
That
was my thing.
Well, and you bring up a really good point around, yes, that students are clearly in the center, and that's how we framed it for the board last night. And I think that that's valuable. But going back to kind of what you said at the beginning, like how do we make sure that these micro credentials are not tangentially
Yeah,
about students or like using them as a data point
yeah.
for growth, right?
Mhm.
I read something really interesting from George Kuros, who's a principal also in Canada, recently over the weekend, where he was posting about how DDI is maybe a little bit misleading because it sort of breaks students down to just the numbers data. So like
Mhm.
spreadsheets are the thing that we expect you to be looking at when we're talking about DDI. And he was making the case that actually it's evidence-driven instruction is a more sort of inclusive term. And I think when we might talk about DDI, that's actually what we're talking about. But he was like, can we just change it to EDI and like
Yeah.
have it be evidence-driven instruction? And thinking about like the full scope of evidence, where the expectation is when we're looking at things, we're looking at them either with kids or we are looking at things more than spreadsheets as a part of that. Yeah. I don't know if
Well,
you
I'm
can react to
thinking-
that, but
No, I'm thinking, so Sam, you saw this, the 4 circles from Learning Forward that we used as part of our presentation. And Noah, it's kind of, the bottom 2 circles of this talk about changes in teacher practices which lead to changes in student results. So linking those 2 things really closely together. So I guess the thinking is micro-credentials could just result in changes in teacher practice, but we have to have that student difference. That has to be a part of it, I think, because that's the goal, right? Is that it makes a difference to kids, not just that the teacher did it, but that kids achieve differently or learn more or, whatever it was.
and that it
So
is
that's a
not
piece of it, yeah.
right, and that it is connected, right?
Yeah.
Like the actions that we are taking have that
Yeah. as
effect,
much
right?
as
Like
we
as
can-
you're moving
yeah,
around the
yeah.
bubbles, it's like, all right, we have started with the change in student performance as sort of the overall goal, but like how we get there is making
Yeah.
those connections
Right.
between those things. All right, Amanda, would you like to focus on one?
Sure.
Which one should we be looking at?
I wanted to look at the one that I put in localized, the learner engagement.
Oh, you made it nice and big for us.
I had to blow it up so I could see it, sorry.
That's okay.
This one just, it like spoke to me. I was looking down at all of these options, and this is all of this instruction. We're going through like PBL. This is how you plan a great project-based learning unit. And this is the cardboard challenge at Arkansas. Like, what are we doing to really hook our students and get them engaged in the material that we're teaching? And so just, I don't know, being in the classroom for so long before I took on this role, I know that that was essential to my own lesson planning. And I really think like, well, what if we are valuing or letting teachers know that we value them for when they do that? Like, how clutch could that be? I see that some of these teachers that are going above and beyond to do that, but that's what we should all be doing, right? We should all be engaging our students. Yeah, so that one just really spoke to me.
Well, and I think that also speaks to the equity lens and the competencies that we're looking at too, right? So engagement, and I know Kevin would add that there are multiple types of engagement, from affective, to the actual rigor of the lesson itself. But like, if that is, and I love the way you said that we're valuing that in our teachers and valuing the engagement itself as an outcome that creates equity. I think that there's value there. What was the, I want to look at what the evidence was that they were asking for out of this. Did you check that out?
Yeah, hold on, let me go back to it. I think I closed the link.
That's all right. I linked to the image itself. So it looks like they have like overview that's in all of them. And then the artifacts are a lesson plan, a teaching video, and a reflection. Do you feel like those are the evidence pieces that you would want to help sort of show the engagement that is, sort of clearly being articulated in the classroom?
Oh man, I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think that's a really important question for us to be asking,
Yeah.
because I think one really easy place for this to go is something that kind of looks very familiar to everything we've ever known in our professional lives. It just has a different name. And so, when we look at, hey, you're going to provide this video, you're going to provide this, written reflection of, does it say 500 word maximum, use this submission form, right? As well as providing the lesson plan. And I think that if we were to adopt this or to kind of borrow it and modify it to make it our own, one thing that we should be really intentional about is knowing why we're doing each of those artifacts. That it's not just a checkbox, it's not just a compliance thing, it's not seat time. It's not like, so are they providing the lesson plan video and reflection? Because that's then going to be used with an authentic audience so that other teachers who go chasing after this credential have exemplars, and or somebody who says, you know what, I don't need that credential, but what I do need is to level up my skill in that area. And so I'm going to use the artifact from Amanda's credential in order to just kind of informally give myself that learning, even though I'm not going to go after the credential myself. And so I think being really intentional about that is kind of the key for this not to just be the equivalent of just stuff going in a manila folder in a file cabinet. I don't know if this building has a basement, but let's just say it does. And there's somebody down there, complaining about their stapler, but really they don't really impact teaching and learning every day. And this stuff just goes there because that's where it's always gone.
Well, I think something that may be missing too is I don't see like any feedback from students about, and I don't know what that would even look like, but I feel like we're so in the box sometimes with evidence, and it drives me crazy. Even teachers that I work with, I'm like, we don't have to be in this box. It doesn't have to be a Google Doc, even though a Google Doc could be a great piece of evidence.
Right.
Like what else could it be, So could it be an interview with students where you're really talking to them and allowing them to provide feedback on the lesson? And I'm not really sure. Like I said, I don't have the answer to this, but I definitely agree with what Noah said, and I don't want it to be the check the boxes, put it in the folder, stick it in the basement.
Hey, I have an idea. When you guys were talking about this, like, what if like a badge in this case that's associated to like great like learning experience for students, and you as a teacher you have the artifacts and collection, you get your badge. What if like badges leveled up for adults in certain areas where you level up because you actually have like student / like and or achievement data that actually could be to maybe not just one experience, but like multiple experiences, or something happening in a classroom where you actually are demonstrating moving the needle. And I know that would have to on because it takes a while to show that. But what if like teachers had something on their badges that that basically showed that they are actually, it's having an effect on like student outcomes, and then like other people could look at these badges in particular and look at the artifacts because it actually is associated to improving student outcomes.
And so I like the idea of sort of an initial level of credentialing would be that you yourself received the learning and you were able to demonstrate competency in this particular area, but that actually leveling up would require student evidence of impact and potentially of hopefully increase student outcomes. And so I like that idea of it's not necessarily that you are getting new learning necessarily, but that you are able to better demonstrate and go deeper with the work that you have already done in that credential. I like that idea a lot. What do other folks think about that particular component or way of talking about leveling up as an adult learner?
When you were saying about what students can do it, and I don't want to take this to the Randa, however, within Randa, and I forget what the very far right-hand column is called. However, it's, what teachers can do, what teachers can do, what teachers can do, and then the last one over to the right is now students can X, Y, and Z. So it kind of mirrors a little bit of that language within that rubric.
Say that one more time, because I want to make sure I've got that.
So in the Randa rubrics, when you were going through and assessing yourself and saying, this is what I can do, within all of the columns, I believe on the far right, it exceeds expectations. And when you're in that, exemplary. Thanks, Kev. That one is all about what students are able to do. Isn't that right, Sam? Isn't that right? So it has like teachers can, and then the far right one is now we're looking at what students are able to do.
Yes.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Yes. Right. So it removes the teacher from being more of the directed person or the person who's directing the learning to more of a facilitator of the learning. Essentially, yeah, Amanda's right in that rubric.
So it would kind of mirror some of that.
Well, and I like that idea of, and I think you're right, it's not like a direct sort of, and let's copy and paste from here, but thinking about the way in which we might align, right, the micro-credentials themselves to be more of, if you want to achieve at the highest level of this micro-credential, you want to level up, then the students have to be demonstrating. I think that there are ways to build that into sort of those leveled micro-credentials in other ways as well.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Please.
Does this potentially take us to a place of like your entry level credential, because it doesn't necessarily require that the students are demonstrating, it allows access to a teacher who, maybe when we think about the granular approaches, right? So maybe her classroom management is a place of real struggle.
Mm-hmm.
So she's not getting credentialed in that, but she is, demonstrating that she's got the KWL skill for the, activating background knowledge,
right,
even though it's not being
itself.
successfully implemented, right? Because the classroom management is an issue, but she has done the reading. She did a lesson plan that, is going to properly implement a KWL protocol.
Yeah, that
right. And so does it need to have been a success, or could she still be credentialed on something that at a summative level, an objective observer looks like a completely failed class, right? But at a more granular level, if we're just looking at the lens of, did she demonstrate that she has the competency here, this skill of activating student prior knowledge, let's credential that, even though the students didn't show it at the entry level. Does that make sense? I think
it definitely
I don't
does.
advocate one way or the other. I think that's something that we should.
So let me make one connection to something that actually Director Yamrick said last night. She asked the question of, one of the teachers was saying that she had some great PD around, I think, close reading strategies. And Director Yamrick said, we have done close reading for years and years and years. How is this any different? And she said, well, I wasn't doing it well before. Right? Like I needed the learning in order to be able to understand how to do it well in my classroom. And I'm summarizing and paraphrasing, but that's sort of how it went. And I like the idea of, you could be credentialed in something that you have done and you have some facility with, but until you demonstrate the student impact of that strategy, that you wouldn't have that sort of next level up. And maybe that is where the cutoff is for some of our other incentives, right? Like if you can demonstrate the student impact, then you have that accelerated pay schedule or whatever it is that we would decide, right? But I think to me, that's where we want to go. That's the end goal, that bubble of like the student outcome. ones, right? So we can support people in learning all of these skills, and then leveling up is that extra demonstration. And then it also, I love that idea of a lower entry point for folks, and also valuing where people are, right?
Mhm.
You have talked about in the past the idea of badging what we already have in some ways, and how do we badge that, but then encourage people to continue to grow, right? So we're at about 5 minutes out from the end of our session here today. No, that's good. The second reason why I wanted us to map some of this out is that actually I think these are really good jumping off points for our own micro-credentials. Some of them, not all of them. And I love, Amanda, that there was something that you were actually just really drawn to as someone where teaching and being a teacher is core to, your identity and what you get really excited about. That to me is a great place to start. I was looking at the copyright or Creative Commons licenses on these. So they're Creative Commons licensed, attribution, non-commercial, no derivative, which means we cannot remix them. What we can do, however, is if it is a good idea, we can build our own around it. We just cannot take the content that is here and move it over. Now, we can adopt some of these, but the issue I have with just sort of straight up adopting them entirely is that we might have to also adopt Bloomboard as a way of chronicling these badges themselves. I would have to get into whether or not they're okay with us just literally taking what is the statement here and like moving it over to Credly and saying, and just submit your evidence here, but it's the exact same micro-credential. But what I would
love the
love
graphics,
us
by the
to
way.
do, sorry, say that again?
I love the graphics.
The graphics that they use for the micro-credentials themselves?
Yeah, I feel like they're a good visual representation of what's
Yes.
happening.
And so I think we can get some inspiration from this, but we are at a point now where we need to start building some. We need to start building one that you would be interested in championing or piloting with a couple of teachers and being able to sort of walk them through, like, this is what it is. Would you be interested in trying it out? Or potentially even just doing that amongst us, right? So we could be the pilot group if we are really worried about going to teachers first or something like that. But what I would love for each of us to do, and I will send out the email sort of stating this as well, is choosing one of these either as an inspiration for your own, or if you want to try it like wholesale, there's something you love, there's nothing you would change about it, you would be able to implement it as is. I just need to check with them on, like, if we moved it over to another system, whether or not that constitutes a derivative or not.
We can cut and paste.
Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
No.
if we don't change anything about it, it is
Yeah.
still essentially the same thing. I just don't know if it's
No, you got
if
your
that's their agreement with
copyright
Bloomboard.
Yeah.
Right. It's still Creative Commons, so we're allowed to reference it, use it in a number of different ways. It's just that no derivative part that makes it a little bit tougher.
When right now, my understanding, in most of these cases, they're not the one. So it says provided by Digital Promise, and then
Right. There is some partner
issued
organization.
by, yeah. So like, for example, on the CTQ ones, it's actually CTQ and Carbro that's going in and validating.
Right.
And so that probably is more where they would
Right.
say
And
it's
so,
like, if we're putting our name on it, we need to be the ones looking at and
correct.
hitting yes issue.
Right. And so to me, these make sense as inspiration, as like, oh, this is a good idea for me to build my own or to use as a structure to build. To me, that makes more sense.
As a pilot, it could just to like on the flip side of that, it could be as just a way to go fast, to just prototype this out, like find a teacher or just yourself or the person next door to you to be like, hey, let's do this together and just
Yep.
see what it's like to get our feet wet and then have something to come back and reflect on.
Correct.
Just putting that out there that
Yep. And so I would say, like, let's present ourselves with those options, right? Like just doing one yourself right? Taking one wholesale and thinking about how you might try it with others, and then using these as inspiration to build your own. I believe we're coming back in 3 weeks. So by then, and I'll make sure that that's in the follow-up email as well, but by then, if you would have done one of those 3 things, where you are ready to share, like, and this is what I have been thinking about, this is what I have either built or tried, and those kinds of things. I see nodding heads from the people in the room. What about the people who are not in the room physically? And Sam is asking, how do we create a micro-credential that can be recognized or incentivized outside of education? That is a good question, and one that I cannot answer in 1 minute, but I am going to chronicle that as something that we should definitely be tackling, because I think the value, especially from disciplines inside of education that connect so concretely to things that are outside. I'm thinking about STEM skills and things like that that are very easy to make the connection. And really even writing skills, like that's not a hard leap to say like this could be credentialed outside of. And so endorsers is sort of the next component of what we might discuss. So I think that that actually leads pretty well. But does anybody have any questions or thoughts around the idea of like, let's try something in the next 3 weeks?
Can I just clarify really quickly?
You may.
So you would like for us to choose one that we have read about, maybe that we are drawn to, and just sort of delve into it, writing our own statements around it, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes, if you are able to choose one and write your own statements, using it as inspiration, but not copying and pasting anything from that, or if you would like to use it as is and make no modifications and delve into just what's there, then you are able to do that as well. But try something between now and I'll look at the date for when we come back. I like having to try something. Something happened to my Q&A and I lost all the links you send. Can you send us an email with the links from today? Of course, Sam. I really appreciate the remote participation from our three friends, one of whom was driving and was still able to pull up the Google Drawing and follow along somehow.
Scary.
It's a little scary, but
Yeah.
you know, we'll allow it.
No. I was not driving when I brought up the drawing and added things to it. I pulled over and, in a school parking lot and used the Wi-Fi so I could do that.
All right, Kevin, I'll see you at Iowa very shortly. Thank you to everyone who was able to come and to all of those peeps who were not, they lost out, man. So I'll see you later.
Awesome, thanks, bye.
Bye.